Buffalo have 17,000 hairs per square inch, which is more than twice what cattle have. Buffalo won't freeze to death, but we often hear about cattle freezing to death, especially in the northern highline of Montana, and as we go north latitude, it's harsher conditions. Buffalo have been acclimated to that for millennia. They put a buffalo and a yak and a cow in a cryo chamber, and Wes Olson from Canada talks a lot about this, but to determine at what level the animal starts to adjust its own fat reserves. It was -20 for a cow, it was -30 for a yak, and they couldn't lower it enough to determine when that happened for bison. And bison do not accumulate fat in the muscle tissue. That has been selectively bred in cattle to make them taste better. Buffalo will congregate their fat reserves around their organs, and this allows them to control their metabolism. They can thermoregulate, and they have just very important, the hair alone is one of the most important contributions that bison have. And it was also very important for us as people, because we would go and gather that hair in the springtime and utilize it to make our ropes for our horses or for our teepee lodges, and we would make that hair into various items that would keep our feet warm, to making our pillows. But that buffalo robe was also something that it was one of the most prized items, because you could keep from freezing to death, and having a buffalo robe was a prized item. And so that buffalo hair is very important, and we've been able to see and witness a return of more birds since we've restored buffalo there as well, and even had a bio blitz with University of Wyoming in Audubon last year. We had over 200 people out, bird specialists, amphibian specialists, reptile specialists, and found over 220 species that were present, which is important baseline information that we'll have to measure against, because we know that plant and animal biodiversity is going to continue to increase. And so the science, the research, providing culturally relevant research opportunities for our tribal college students is very important. And so we have 2 grad students that are with us now and helping to monitor some of these changes that we anticipate seeing. I mentioned my thesis work on cultural plants around those relic wallows, and these are the species that were still statistically shown to be prevalent in because of the wallows. So yarrow and arnica and tall bluebells, 3 cultural plants that statistically were higher because of those wallows, relic wallows even, which was interesting. So we have a ghost of a buffalo on our flag. I want to point out something about our flag that's always been very interesting to me. This Great Seal of Wyoming. If you look at the fine letters in the Great Seal of Wyoming, it says livestock, mines, grain, and oil. Now I want you to think back about that medicine wheel paradigm, and that medicine wheel and what that meant about our food and our connection to the cosmos, and where we would relate to the land and what we would gather from the land. Compared to this, livestock, mines, grain, and oil. That's a bit exploitative in my opinion. And so I think that when we think about a lot of the contention of things in the West, it is about our perspective, about our worldview, about what our relationship is to the land, the water, and the wildlife. Reservations were opened up for homesteading. It created this checkerboard effect of land jurisdiction, tribal, allotted, fee lands. Well, imagine how hard it is to put together some wildlife habitat when the land looks like that. Migration, corridor, connectivity, wildlife, access to those places becomes extremely difficult when you have a checkerboard system like this that affects many reservations. No different at Wind River, where you have tribal land intermixed with fee land and allotted lands. that big Riverton reclamation area makes it a bit challenging to think about wildlife and habitat connectivity when things like agriculture and livestock have been jammed down our throats for over 100 years. The University of Wyoming and Migration Initiative put together some nice maps showing our place names, not only on the reservation but also in the state of Wyoming, about the tribe's history in some of these places. And so I would encourage you maybe to take a look at the Wyoming Migration Initiative book that Greg Nickerson and others put together about the important wildlife habitat that exists in the state. The Wind River Reservation has often been a black hole in a lot of that information. And fortunately, we've got a little bit more information out there that can demonstrate the tribe's history and relationship to the state. This is kind of in the middle of the reservation, but here I want to highlight where we kind of began. And back in the 80s, the Shoshone tribe was able to purchase some of these fee lands north of the river, again, which were privatized when the reservation was opened up for homesteading. So the tribe has to buy back these lands that right are in the middle of our reservation. And so this was a particular piece of ground that was bought back in the 80s. In 2014, I worked with the Business Council to designate this 300 acres for buffalo. It was the very first place we started, and that we brought 10 buffalo there in 2016 that came from the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge in Iowa, those conservation genetics managed by the Department of Interior. And so we wanted those animals because of their conservation genetics and started with the first 10 in 2016. Almost $8 million later, we've been able to piece together several other contiguous properties that have made it about 2,000 acres there now that we have for the Shoshone tribe's buffalo. We've removed the interior fences that put all those together, so there's one continuous fence that goes around the 2,000 acres now. We currently have 160 buffalo on that 2,000 acres. We've brought in 8 different sources. So I mentioned the first 10 in 2016 were from the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge in Iowa. In 2017, we brought 10 buffalo from the National Bison Range in Montana. In 2019, we brought 30 animals from the Nature Conservancy from Missouri. We brought a couple batches of conservation genetics from the city of Denver, also from Antelope Island in Utah, and the Soapstone Prairie in northern Colorado, which is part of Colorado State University. So we've been able to diversify or grow the genetic diversity of our population by bringing those animals in from those other places. Now, every animal that has to come into not only this state, but every other state has to go through the state vet, and they go through regulatory requirements that we continue to obviously meet. Intertribal Buffalo Council moves 2,000 buffalo throughout the country every year, and we meet those state requirements of every state that we're going into to deliver those animals. So there's been over 70 calves born here on this 2,000 acres now. We had 34 calves born this year, and so the herd continues to grow. We also harvest because it's important for us to have that reciprocal relationship with our relative because we need to feed our people. 2 years ago was the first time that the Shoshone tribe's been able to take our own animals from our own land for our annual Sundance in 139 years. And so we now have that animal available for our ceremonial leaders. We work closely with our food distribution programs. We harvested 2 buffalo last week that are going out in 700 food boxes in November for Native American Heritage Month. So families will be able to come and get these food boxes free of charge to ensure that our people have access to better foods, better protein. And so that's very important for our community members. And we're also working to get it into our elder programs, to get it into our schools, And I met with the Shoshone leadership last week, and we're going to be able to get that buffalo into our casinos. So now you'll be able to go to our casino restaurants and order buffalo that are grown right there at Wind River. So that's another important step in getting that animal not only available to our own community, but people that are coming to visit and going to our establishments. That area in blue here was a piece of land that was purchased. It was owned by some guy in Ohio who would come for 2 weeks out of the year and shoot guns and fireworks and everything. One time it ran our buffalo off and we had to round them up, but we were able to purchase this property, which was important. We were able to make sure that there's no more guns and fireworks that are being shot off 2 weeks of the year down there. Not too far from where we are, the Shoshone tribe, but we're working closely with the Northern Arapaho. And so here's where the Northern Arapaho tribe's buffalo are, on 1,700 acres, and they've currently got 120 buffalo over here. And so 2019 was the first year that the Arapaho brought 10, and then similar to where Shoshone tribe's animals are, we brought in conservation genetics to both tribes. And to grow our herds. So in this map you can see where the Shoshone tribe's buffalo are up there in the north, and the Arapaho buffalo are here. And then this area in gray is one range unit. There's 54 range units on the reservation that have all been prioritized for cattle production. This is the first range unit that has been designated for buffalo. It's only one range unit. It's 17,000 acres, but it's contiguous to both herds. This April, the Shoshone tribe designated our buffalo as wildlife. Only a month or so ago, the Northern Arapaho did as well. That was important so that we could not only change the paradigm about how we see buffalo, but it also meant that these tribes' buffalo wouldn't be subject to a grazing permit through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who's our land managing agency as trustee. We didn't want our buffalo to be seen as competitive with individual cattle producers. They still are seen that way, but this chunk of land hadn't had cattle on it for 10 years. And so last July, when it came the time to designate it for buffalo, there was no cattle on it. There was no producer that was ran off of it. And oftentimes there's rumors and misconceptions that we're trying to run every cow off of the reservation and every cattle producer off the reservation, which is wholly untrue. I believe there needs to be some balance. Think about that medicine wheel. It's not one way or the other. It's finding balance. And buffalo are important to the communities and the tribes there. Out of 15,000 tribal members, less than 3% are ranchers. So I question why 54 range units are prioritized for cattle. These are the range units. And so we think about the diminishment of the reservation from 44 million acres to roughly 3. And then we lost the Bruneau Cession, the McLaughlin Agreement. And then 1906, all lands north of the river open for homesteaders. When it comes to thinking about our conservation successes in history, think about the game code, the wilderness area, protection of wolves and bears, designating buffalo as wildlife. It's kind of challenging manifest destiny in a little way. Trying to maybe think a little bit differently now that we can about how buffalo can play a role. So that's the only range unit on the reservation for buffalo at this time. And so it's important to help folks understand that we're not releasing buffalo all over the reservation. Even though they have designation as wildlife, they're still on contained and designated land for buffalo, and that's important. Thinking back about that Wyoming Migration Initiative and their work closely with Fish and Wildlife Service and our tribal fish and game, where we've radio collared not only mule deer and elk, but also wolves and bears. Notice where the best habitat is, right there in the wilderness area. So if that's important for wolves and bears and elk and deer and migration and it's part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, I think buffalo have a role to play in that. When the first 10 buffalo came in 2016, it was like we were bringing home our long-lost relative. This animal that was systematically destroyed, that we can only go and see and witness in certain areas even today. We've been able to build back a very important relationship with this animal, to be able to spend time with it every day, to be out in the herd, to understand their matriarchy. They're led by the females. To understand their herd dynamics, their vocalizations, the way they communicate, the way they take care of one another. They're very compassionate. They're also very smart. This was the first calf born in 2017, and we've since had over 70 calves born in the last 9 years. And so it's been quite a learning experience, certainly, but I would say that we've learned a great deal about how to live alongside this animal again. That this animal has been missing from our lives. We had a buffalo bash for Indigenous Peoples Day this last week, where we had over 200 people come, native as well as non-native, that values what's happening there at Wind River for this animal. Last year was able to find an orphan calf. He was a little bull, and we bottle fed him for about 11 months, and he's now out in the herd. I can't even tell you which one he is, but the goal was to be able to get him back in the herd and get him integrated in a way where he didn't know that he wasn't a buffalo. And we successfully did that last year. We had another orphan calf. When a buffalo has twins, they generally abandon one. So we caught those little guys and raised them up, and we got them back out into the herd. We have a little female this year, and she's now about 500 pounds. But the goal is, again, to get her back out into the herd, and she will grow just like this little bull calf did. We give a lot of talks amongst our school kids. When we did that harvest, or those 2 harvests last week, the first one was on the Arapaho enclosure. And so we brought 60 students from the Arapaho school out for that harvest, where they were able to participate. The following day we did a harvest on the Shoshone side, and we had 90 kids there from the Fort Washakie school, from 6th graders all the way through high school. And they all got to participate in this ceremony, but then also the harvest of that animal. When we go in to talk about with the kids about our relationship with buffalo, is talking to them about all of those items that we used to utilize, the bladder, the stomach, how we would brain tan the hide, how we use the hair, how we would make items from the bones, the sinew. That buffalo, every gift of that buffalo has a use that we want to be able to share with our kids. A lot of what we're talking to our kids about is also how we protect what little we have left. It wasn't very long ago that we couldn't say these things. Land back, water back, culture back, buffalo back. We're still working to protect what little we have left on the Wind River Reservation. Our languages are slipping away. We have high rates of suicide. We have high unemployment. And a lot of our people are struggling. This is one way that we can help heal from the past. It's another way that we can help restore what was taken from us. It's very important that our young people have an identity, are proud of their identity as Shoshone and Arapaho people, as well as many tribes across the country. It's not just happening at Wind River. There's 87 tribes across the country that are working to restore this relationship with this animal. Down in Florida, up in New York. We flew 3 Yellowstone bulls to Alutiiq in Alaska. We called it Operation Wild Buffalo Wings. We trucked buffalo from Fort Peck to the Blackfeet Reservation. We built these shipping containers for these 3 bulls. They trucked them over to Seattle, where they got on a plane by FedEx and were FedExed to Alaska. Then they got on a barge and went from Anchorage to Alutiiq Island and are now living with grizzly bears, brown bears on Alutiiq Island in Alaska. That is a very important protein source for the people that live there. Food in those remote villages is very hard to come by. It's very expensive to have a gallon of milk even brought into those places. So they wanted to improve the ability of their people to hunt and harvest and sustain their families by hunting buffalo. And so they're up to about 200 buffalo there on Alutiiq. But there's 87 tribes, all with different and unique histories and stories, songs, ceremonies that they continue to hold on to and practice. So I've been fortunate to be in a lot of those conversations with other tribes, but also at the national level. We've been working on some legislation called the Indian Buffalo Management Act, which would solidify the federal government's trust responsibility to support tribes in buffalo restoration. You may be familiar with the Bolt decision that happened in the Northwest about co-management of salmon. And today, those Northwest tribes receive $140 million a year to co-manage salmon resource, a species that wasn't nearly exterminated. So in the Indian Buffalo Management Act, we use the language of the Bolt decision that the federal government has trust responsibility to help us support this animal, one that was nearly exterminated. And there's more than twice the amount of people who benefit from buffalo than do the Northwest fisheries. Not that that's not important, it's incredibly important for those people there, but there should be some parity. Because the Intertribal Buffalo Council is operated on $2 to $3 million per year, even though our membership has grown from 12 tribes in 1992 to 87 today. The funding level stayed stagnant. One thing that Indian Buffalo Management Act would do would be to bring some parity to buffalo restoration. In previous administration, there was the Bison Conservation Initiative that was created with Deb Holland. Bison Conservation Initiative was an important effort to help restore wild buffalo, protected under federal law as wildlife. It would also bring back the genetic importance of restoring this animal to the landscape. Shared stewardship between states and tribes and NGOs would also help to restore this cultural importance, nutritional importance to Native American communities. And so the Bison Conservation Initiative has been an important effort. We put together a shared stewardship strategy for bison conservation. There were 9 tribal co-authors along with 5 federal agency co-authors that put this document together in the hopes that agencies, states, and NGOs can work together for a shared vision of what buffalo restoration can be on public lands. There's 450 million acres of public land managed by the Forest Service and the Park Service and the BLM. If we want to see meaningful buffalo restoration in the next 50 years, it's going to take the collaboration and working together to achieve that. Perhaps some of the stuff we're doing at Wind River could lend some insight as to what we can achieve on public land later down the road. But there's no shortage of challenges at this time, as many of the folks are out there at that new No Kings rally. We have a lot of things that are wrong in this country, going in a direction that undermines federal trust responsibility, as well as sovereignty and treaty rights of tribes. Restoring our buffalo relative is an exercise of our self-determination to take care of our relative, but also take care of our future, our young people having access to a new way of life moving forward. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to come and visit with you. I'm happy to answer or do my best to answer any questions you may have, or if you have any comments, we can go off on a bunch of tangents, but I want to thank everybody for not falling asleep. It is late in the day, so thanks again.